My name is Chris Golis. I've done various things as salesperson, general manager, and a venture capitalist. And I've written 3 books. And all I wish to say is, if you want to learn about emotional intelligence, what is the secret to career success, and how to use a tool effectively and practically, please listen to this episode.
Welcome to yet another exciting episode of the Online Prosperity Show, your premier destination for exclusive insights into the journeys of remarkable individuals that have shaped the world and are actually shaping our world. I'm your host, Prosper Taruvinga, and today we've got a guest whose career path actually reads like an adventurous novel. I was just talking to him behind the scenes and just telling me all the things that he has done and, all the successes he has accomplished. And I can't wait, to share our next guest with you. And this journey is just filled with unexpected twists, profound insights, and you'll be surprised. There's a whole touch of humor and emotional intelligence along the way. Now, Christopher, how are you doing today?
Well, pretty well. Nice to meet you, and glad you've given me this opportunity.
Absolutely. Well, the pleasure is all mine. I mean, you're describing the place that you live, in Sydney, and how the picturesque views that you have. I'm actually the one grateful because, you could be doing better things with your time right now. So thank you so much, Christopher, for joining us on the call today. Now, for those that are watching right now, I've, already introduced you to Christopher, but I want you to sort of imagine having started your career journey at places like IBM, and you're navigating all the corporate drama that comes along with it, and then ending up becoming maybe a general manager at TNT, and then maybe with a turn of events, you now start becoming a prominent figure in the world of investment banking and venture capital. So this is the high stakes environment that Christopher actually made a name for himself and a career to boot. And we're going to be exploring how he has spent over 25 years as a venture capitalist, directing over 30 private and public companies. And also, his story doesn't actually end there. He noticed that a lot of people were not really connecting with each other in all these corporate environments. So in 2007, he actually started a journey to start demystifying emotional intelligence. And for those that don't know what it is, stick around so we can learn a thing or two about this phenomenon. And he actually developed his own model, which is the 7MTF model of temperament. And from that, he's authored over 11 books on the subjects, and he's got EQ courses that he has used all along to empower over 20,000 individuals in leadership, management, and sales. Now, this is a person that knows what he's talking about, and a person that has literally, done all the work. And all we have today is a privilege of learning from an expert. Now, Chris, I could go on and talk about things that I'm not even qualified about. Maybe you can, give us a snapshot of, what it is that you've been working on and what's really exciting you these days in relation to the work that you've, been doing.
Well, I think you understand. To me, I always like to know the background of people and sort of just get a feeling when they hold themselves up to, if they're described or hold themselves up to an expert. I was extremely fortunate in the sense that you can hear from the twang in my accent. My father was in the American Air Force, and my mother was English, and they married. And during World War II, it was towards the end of it, and I ended up basically being born in November 1944. Right, I went to 11 schools before I was 11 because my father was in the Air Force, but constantly being transferred this is in the, the top, pretty much of the Cold War when it really got going. And anyway, he ended up, in fact, fortunately, being basically cut back and retrenched in 1957, right? And we ended up going back to Bath. Now, I have this great line about Americans. They say, they're the Quakers who went to Pennsylvania to do good and ended up doing rather well. Well, my father did that in reverse. He went to Bath. My step-grandfather on my mother's side was an illegal bookie between the wars, had a bit of capital. And I started, I don't know, have you ever been to Bath? But no. Well, Bath is Lonely Planet. You remember the travel book guidebook?
Yes.
It was set up by Tony and Maureen Wheeler. Tony Wheeler, well, they used to say in the book, if you had only one day in England, one day, what you have to do is leave London and go down to go to Bath. Now, Bath was the Las Vegas of England, right, during the 80s. It was built on gambling and prostitutions. And it became an incredibly wealthy place like Las Vegas. And the buildings which you see are in Bath are Georgian terraces. And there's an abbey basically built around 81,000. Roman house built by the Romans. But then there's this incredible Georgian architecture. And it was a lot of novels of Jane Austen, probably the greatest living, one of the great living, not living now, but one of the great English novelists. And she describes, what happened in Bath. And of course, the saying, what happens in Bath stays in Bath. So that was the story. Anyway, I was very fortunate. Grammar school took me on. And for several reasons, I just ended up, I wasn't a jock when I was at the American schools. I was basically a nerd who read books. And what happened was I ended up, luckily because I played basketball and played touch rugby touch football in England, I ended up playing rugby and becoming quite competent at it. And of course, rugby is South Africa comes in Belgium game, right? And it was fantastic. I ended up, in fact, being captaining the first 15 of the school, which is like being in America the starting quarterback of the first 11. I then also ended up becoming head prefect of the school. And then best of all, on the A-level exams, I did far better than expected. It was me included. And what happened is I took a gap year, and that day I was told to go to Oxford and Cambridge. I was accepted at both universities, but chose Cambridge. And basically what happened then is I was reading chemistry as my main subject, but I did not experimental psychology. And the first lecture I attended at Cambridge, I've never forgotten, because you walked in and the guy says, "Welcome to Cambridge." He said, at the other place, they produce prime ministers. He's talking about Oxford, right? Here, we produce Nobel Prize winners. Cambridge has produced more Nobel Prize winners in science than any other university in the world. Now, it's not in that position now. That position has been taken over in Harvard, but this is 1964, right? Why is this? This is because Cambridge is the center of two things in the world: empiricism and skepticism. Empiricism means you have to either discover whether it's true or not by experiment or by observation. Skepticism is you trust nobody. You question every authority all the time. Science is never settled. All right. It could just continually develop. That's the secret of the West. And he's then said, which I've never forgotten, there aren't many good papers written in psychology that are good science at the moment, but there is one you should all read. It's written by a guy called Miller. It's called The Magic Number 7 plus or minus 2. Miller was a professor of, I think, psychology at either Princeton or Yale. Can't remember. And what he had demonstrated was 7 is the limit of your short-term memory. You can remember 7 items relatively quickly. And he did this by feeding series of random numbers to people. And he's discovered this, that for most people, 7 is their capacity. And I've never forgotten that. That's why you should never have more than 7 points on a slide. They generally recommend 6 max, and then 6 words to describe the point you're making if you're doing a PowerPoint presentation. And for example, 2 examples of it being used, in England, the postcodes, no postcode is more than 7 characters long, right? In Australia, we had a great example when we had the telephones. It used to be our telephone numbers were 7 digits, right? and they've added on another digit, so now it's 9 digits. And I remember talking to a Telstra general manager that you did this because people would dial more wrong numbers. And he looked at me, wouldn't answer the question, walked away. So and I was right. The number, if you check the data, the number wrongly called, because it's hard to remember 8 digits than 7. Anyway, I went through Cambridge remembering the 7 items, and I did psychology, and I remember 7 items very, very much. And there was a famous experiment written up by in the Times where they gave a psychologist 7 profiles of famous people, and he then gave them a personality test. And then he gave an astrologer the the date of birth, time of birth, and where they're located. And then they asked each of the 7 people which psychological profile fitted them and which astrological profile fitted them. And the results were quite amazing. The 7 people all chose the same astrological profile, right? But everyone chose the correct, basically, personality profile they'd drawn up. There were 7 of them, and each person chose the correct one. And the article was all about how astrology, is a pseudoscience, but I was stunned that psychological testing had gained such a level of precision, right? I remember being floored by it. Anyway, cut a long story short, I joined IBM, worked for 4 years, 2 years with IBM, joined a couple of startups, both went bankrupt, down in 9 months. And that's sort of, my CV was looking a bit risky, not too good. So I decided I'd do an MBA. And the great thing about going to Cambridge and then going to London Business School, then it was basically free, right? None of us paying $50,000 for an MBA. It was free. At the MBA, I did 2 years. I was extremely fortunate. My tutor was a guy called Charles Handy. Now, this is before he became famous. Charles Handy was one of the biggest management gurus in England. In fact, he was, the number one they've ever produced, right? And just to give the demonstration of how good he was, when the Harvard Business Review, which is the top management magazine, right, produced its 75th anniversary edition, they asked 5 people to write an essay, write an article. And Peter Drucker was one. I'm sure you've heard of Peter Drucker, right, etc. Well, Charles Handy was the only one who was non-American. That's where he sits. And he's written 19 books, right? But I had him as a tutor before he was famous, right? My MBA was 71, 73. And Charles is one of the greatest lateral thinkers you've ever seen in your life, right? And I could spend half an hour talking about him and giving you his insights. But my famous incident was I had done several things. At Cambridge, when I went to the job people after 2 years, and I was doing chemistry, their words were, "Get the hell out of chemistry. There's a surplus of chemists being produced, far too many. We think what you should do is switch out of natural sciences. You'll get a degree anyway because you passed." I had what's known in Cambridge as Desmond. I don't know if you've ever heard that. Have you ever heard of Desmond? Well, in Cambridge, degrees are first, 2 1s, 2 2s, third. If you get a 2-2, you basically, it's called in Cambridge a Desmond, in reference to Desmond Tutu, the Bishop of South Africa, right? It's clicked. I can see you smiling. So that's the nickname. So I picked up a Desmond in natural sciences. I was pretty social at Cambridge. I'm the first to admit it. It is a fantastic, it's a dream university. There's no question about it of anyone in the world, I can tell you. And I switched to economics, which was brilliant, because what happened was, to get to the exam, what you had to do is an exam. Everyone sat at the end of the Cambridge year in microeconomics, one in macroeconomics, and because I'd done mathematics and the sciences, you could do 2 statistics subjects and get through them pretty easily. But what happened was I was writing 2 essays a week and then defending it public in front of a tutor, right? And you start writing 2 essays a week, one in microeconomics and one in macroeconomics, you get quite good at writing essays. That's the Cambridge system in action, is that you do a tutorials, not these tutorials in front of 50 or 60 people, one where you stand up and say, right, and he starts firing questions. You said in your essay, blah, 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 blah. I dispute that, blah, blah, blah. I think this, and this. And you're arguing with these guys who've got first-class honors, basically for at least half an hour. This is the Socratic teaching method in action, right? At the MBA, my London business, I was doing a bit better. I was basically probably the exam marks accounted for 50%, and you had 4 exams at the end of 2 years, and basically class marks counted for 50%, right? And out of the exam results, the classroom results, I was sitting 50 out of 100. We had 4 exams, and I had to effectively, I told my girlfriend at the time I was going to concentrate a bit on these exams, see if I could do a bit better. And I topped 3 of the exams and became second in the other one. They had to give me a distinction. It was very funny. I had the distinction in the MBA from London Business School, and McKinsey got on hold of me and said, right, and they flew me twice to New York for interviews. And at the end of it, they said, we're going to offer you a place here at McKinsey's head office. Anyway, I then go back to Charles, and Charles is my tutor, and I've been seeing him regularly. And he said, Chris, have you got a job yet? And I said, Charles, I've got the big one. McKinsey's in New York. The dream job of any MBA student, even now, right? And he looks at me and says, Chris, I'm not sure I would take it if I were you. I said, Charles, what do you mean? And he said, I've been thinking, what is the secret to career success? Do you know what the secret is to career success? Prosper, have you ever guessed what it is? This is natural thinking in action, right?
Yes, says, I'm about to hear the secret to career success right now.
This is Charles Handy. And by the way, to all your listeners, he's written 19 books. I've read most of them. He has never mentioned it, right? He says it himself. He said, I think this is a secret to career success is being good at one-on-one meetings. I don't mean being good. I mean being brilliant. Because every so often you're going to meet someone who has power, right, to influence your career or make a decision that will help you. You have to convince that people within effectively 10 minutes that you are authentic, you have integrity, and that basically if they give you help, it will be a smart thing for them to do. They may get a reward in it somehow. Also, a lot of people want to help people, right? But you have to come across, and if you're going to say you're going to do something, you have to do it. But you got to have authentic integrity. And he said, we don't teach you how to do this at an MBA program. We teach you lots of other things, but we don't teach you this. And I went, yeah, well, you don't. And he said, I've decided this, but the best thing you can do, Chris, is become a salesperson. Because if you don't become good at one-on-one meetings as a salesperson, you won't eat. Well, I was somewhat shattered at this advice, I must confess, right? Anyway, what happened was one of my colleagues at the business school, his dad was the director of the British computer company called ICL. They were desperate to hire me. Now, the MBA program only been going for 6 years at London Business School. MBAs were the brightest new degree on the horizon. And they were desperate to hire me because I had experience of IBM computers and I was going to get an MBA, right? And they said to me, we'd like to hire you. And I said, well, I want to go to Australia. I was slightly impressed at the direction that England was taking at the time. And remember, this is 6 years before Thatcher, right? And England was on a slow decline, right? I could give you examples of that. Mm-hmm. And I thought, well, Australia looked a lot better. I said, well, I want to go to Sydney. And I actually told them, I said, I want to be a salesperson. If you're willing to do that, I'll consider an offer. I described my job to ICO, what they had to do to get me, not what I had to do to get them. So it was quite amusing, right? Anyway, they ended up making me an offer, and that's what happened. So I came to Sydney, and the first thing that normally happens to salesmen then is they give you a copy of the yellow pages. You know, they say start ringing at people, and I sucked at cold calling. Mm-hmm. I don't think I actually got an interview after 6 months. Right, mm-hmm. That's what happened. Right, I was terrible, and of course, I'm thinking to myself, "What the hell have I done? This is the stupidest decision I've ever made in my life." Okay, and then what happened is the door suddenly opened. I did a course for 2 days run by a company called Chandler McLeod. At that time, they were the leading headhunters in Sydney. They were the leading human resources management company. And they had a technology called the Wadsworth, right, which analyzed the person in terms of 7 core temperament components, right? It was invented by a guy starting off in America, who said basically the secret of understanding people is to realize we're all slightly mad. And what he meant was madness is not black or white. Okay, it's on a spectrum, right? And he said at the time that this chap, there were 4 mental illnesses: schizophrenia, cyclodia, which is bipolar personality disorder, what he called hysteria, okay, and a fourth one, which he called I'm trying to remember, being an epileptoid, epilepsy. That was the 4 mental illnesses. And he said you had a 5th component called the normal, which acted as a factor of self-control. In fact, what happened was when I started working out more, I realized the 7 components actually were different mental illnesses, but I worked them out. And the self-control is actually your level of neurosis. You know, if you're neurotic, you lack emotional self-control. If you're low in neurosis and neurotic component, you have a high degree of self-control, which is one of the secrets to emotional intelligence, right? Anyway, what happened was I finally got on my desk a tender. And I remember being, a tender, someone who wants to speak to me. And I was really excited about it. I was actually going to go to a meeting, a sales meeting. So I go to see this guy, a guy called Neville Warner. It was the Electricity Commission. And I was really excited about it. And as I went out, everyone was saying good luck to me. There were 4 other salesmen who were more senior to me. After I walked out, they all burst out laughing. And the reason was they knew that ICL always lost to IBM. That was the golden rule, right? And I didn't know this. And what happened was when tenders came in, they were getting about 2 tenders a week. The first salesman would look at the tender, and if he wanted to do it, he would do it. And then he'd pass it down to the next guy who was senior. Then he'd pass it down to it. So they were getting 2 tenders a week. And after 6 months, I finally got one because I was the bottom of the pile, right? So anyway, I go and see this guy. And one of the characteristics they saw is an engineer. It's a bit like your office at the moment behind you. Lots of books. They love to read. They have a whiteboard. And I've seen you looking up a bit, and you're looking up at the whiteboard somewhere. You've obviously got a screen with various clues on it in front of you so you can watch what's going on, right? Well, that's classic engineer behavior. And I walked out and said, this guy is a classic engineer, according to the Hum Wadsworth. This guy's absolutely a classic E. So I looked up the notes we had, and they said 2 things. They love to read, right, about something. And when they get involved, if they get involved in a project, they want to know everything about it, if it excites them. Well, what had happened to Neville Warner? He was probably one of the better project managers of the Electricity Commission. He was then in charge of the IT department. His CEO said, our IT is a mess, fix it, right? And that was Neville Warner's project, right? So he had to fix it. And first thing they did was they wrote a tender and sent them out, right? Anyway, I went back to him and I brought a manual with me. And I said, I'd like to talk to you about what I'm going to propose to you as a computer. And he said, what's that? And he said, well, I'm going to recommend, I know this sounds funny, a secondhand computer for you to learn on. And I want you to learn George 3. We've just sold a system to Woolworths, right? It's a system which is most unusual. Instead of putting in punch cards, you sit at a computer terminal and you key in the stuff over a terminal, right? And so it's no using punch cards. You drive the system with basically a computer terminal. And he said, well, that's absolutely fascinating. And I said, and we're going to get you to run it. I said, but first of all, I brought this book, a manual on an introduction to George 3. I wonder if you'd be interested in it. And I never forgot as he reached across to grab the manual. And he said, oh, this is interesting. Thank you very much. So I said, right, I'll ring you. I'll give you a couple of weeks to read it, and I'll come back and give you a ring. Anyway, I rang him a week later and said, have you had a chance to read the manual? I was up to 4 a.m. last night reading the manual. Oh, wow. He said, Chris, do you mind if I give it the book? Keep this manual. I want to give it to the other 2 people on the team. They're more technical than me. I said, no. Do you want another manual? You've got another manual? Well, I said, well, actually, there's about 4 manuals on George 3. I'll bring another one in and see if you want to continue. And over the next month, I brought them 4 manuals. They got thicker and thicker, and they read every page.
Wow.
Right? Next thing happened is they said, well, we got to run this benchmark. And I said, yeah. And they said, well, here's what the benchmark is. This is program, it's payroll, blah, blah, blah. And it runs basically on these disk files, not these disk files, these tape files. I said, yeah. And I said, yeah. And he said, well, you got to run it. I said, no, we're not going to run it. You're going to run it. He said, what do you mean? I said, you're going to run it. How else are you going to learn the system unless you run it? So I set them up to run it overnight. The system had a great feature called, believe it or not, multi-programming. You could run more than one system at a time. I mean, that's just common now, but this is way back in, and effectively this is 1973. This is before PCs and all that stuff, right? Anyway, net result was I rang up the next. I didn't want to go into the benchmark. I thought this, but I sent one of my system guys. I thought there was no point in me staying up all night. I don't need to learn the system. And I sent one of my technical guys. Anyway, I rang up his office the next morning to see how the benchmark ran. And he said, it's Neville Warner. And they said, oh, no, he hasn't come in yet. I said, he hasn't come in yet. Oh, what's going on? So I then rang Woolworths. And I said, did the guys come in last night and run the benchmark? They're still here. What do you mean they're still here?
They're still there.
I said, they're still here. I said, oh. He said they're running it on one of our lower partitions. So I said, put Neville on the phone. I said, Neville, what's going on? He said, Chris, we've got the benchmark down to 13 minutes, 22 seconds, but we're all sure we can carve another 2 minutes off it. Do you think Woolworths will mind if we stay here and try and make it better? I said, Neville, if Woolworths are happy to set for you to work there, I said, you go right ahead, do what you want to do. Is this guy going to buy? Of course he's going to buy. It was the only computer sale taken off IBM by ICL in the world that year.
And
I was a hero. Came from the system, right? Just following it. Because by now, then I was sold on the system, right? Analyzing people. That's the key. It analyzes people and causes 7 components, right? So I used it. What happened then is I got ahead and I ended up being a general manager at TNT. And there was a chap there called Keith Stevenson, right? And Keith basically had read Miller's The Magic Number 7 plus or minus 2. And what he did is he had developed a whole selling system based on the number 7. And there were 7 objections, 7 ways of handling objections, 7 closes. And what his argument was, if you try one close and if that failed, try another one. I said, no, analyze the person you're meeting, right? Work out what their dominant two components are and sell to them, right? So I'm talking to a guy who's an engineer, and that's what I did, right? And we used the puppy dog cell, got them to use the system, and by the time they finished using it, they didn't have time for anything else, right? And the other thing I invented was so I merged the two things together. And the other thing I invented was a way of analyzing people very quickly. It's called Top Golf. And it's the way they talk, right? The organization they work for, the position in the organization, their dress, right? What their office looks like, and the gambit. Do they keep you waiting or are you on time, right? So if we're quickly looking, behind you, you've got a whole mass of books. I know you got a project screen on top. First thing I know is you got a lot of engineers. Firstly, like me, you're wearing a blue shirt. Blue, right? Each component has a color, right? Blue you can see down there, right? Blue is the color for politicians. These people are basically, their mental, by the way, engineers, their mental illness is obsessive compulsive disorder, right? Right? So that's basically, they get obsessive compulsive on a project, right? An engineer.
You've got it all figured out, right?
Then politician, basically like yourself, they're competitive. They want to win, right? And your third component, I would say, is interesting. It's what I call it a mover or a socializer in some sense. This is basically manic. You got a lot of energy. You're cheerful. You're happy. You smile a lot. Energetic. Probably talk too much, right? Well, no, I'm just trying to give you.
I've met my match.
Okay, right? Oh no, I can do it. Well, I'm just basically sort of giving you a sense. So, and I've got a bit more hustler. Okay, I'm more interested in money, right? Okay, etc. I'm a hustler, politician, engineer. You're a mover, politician, engineer. You get the idea? Now, I'm finishing up now. What happened was I implemented this TNT, and we had this selling system because we're selling payrolls. It was a standard multi-level sell. It was the paymaster, the accountant, financial controller, the classic strategic triangle. You know, the end user recommender, the technical recommender was normally the DP manager, and then there's basically the decision maker, economic decision maker, who's generally the financial controller. And the strength of the system is not only do you sell differently to each person, so you realize what happens, and what you're meant to do. That's the secret, and that's showing emotional intelligence. It's tailoring your. You want to get the person on side, tailoring your appeal. But the second thing is when you go into the meeting with the financial controller, you say to the salesman, "What's he like?" And he says things like, "Well, he's divorced. He drives a red MGB. I think he's got a bit of H in him." Right? I'm just trying to give you the feeling. And so what happens is you go in the meeting half prepared, right? You know your choice. Right? It's not he's tough or he's hard to negotiate, but you know what's going to happen is if he's an H, he's going to want to negotiate. So you make sure you put a deal which is quite high, and then let him cut you back on the price. So he gets basically an average price, right? Or maybe a little bit higher if you can manage it. I'm just trying to give you the flavor. And what happened was in the last 18 months I was there, what happened is that we should have got there were about 18, I think there was something like 15 major tenders. On market share basis, we should have got one or two. These are like Esso Petroleum, George Weston Foods. I mean, these are big accounts. South Australia hospitals. I mean, these were massive, big accounts of payroll. And we won every tender, all 15, right? Wow. Of course, wham, etc. And, I had Sir Peter Abels, who ran the Hungarian Jury, Chris, you're going so well, what's going on? I said, oh, well, we're just trying out one or two ideas, Sir Peter, etc. So, I mean, that's where, so that was basically how it all got started and basically got going, right? So that's that story, right? So that's it. And you should ask some questions now. Sorry, but I thought it was useful just to give the picture how it happened, right? That's what we began it all, right?
Fantastic, and thank you so much. That was so elaborate, and I didn't even want to interject because you were in flow there, and you just really highlighted so many things, especially about the number 7 and how you actually then went on and utilized it, and just also framing it from when you're trying to sell to someone and looking at someone, right. Basically you want to see what makes them tick and use that to your sort of advantage and things of that nature. But I just wanted to go back just a little bit because you highlighted something that's very important, Christopher, where you grew up in a space where you consistently had to move around. You consistently had to meet new people and also showcase who you are, et cetera, not based on what people already know of you. Do you think this sort of background, especially 11 schools in 11 years, got you to actually master emotional intelligence a lot because you're introducing yourself to people constantly and you're not basing on past experiences of what people already know of you, because you will find out that so many people, I'm in Melbourne, so many people have never left the state. All right. So they don't have to reintroduce themselves, and they just sort of have an assumption that everybody already knows who they are, even if they're going into some sort of a sales environment, because I think that part is very crucial in helping people have that understanding that, wherever you are by definition a rookie, and you're not basing on who you were previously. I don't know what sort of comment you can
cover. Well, a bit of element of that, but I think until I wasn't, some people are intuitively good at it. My wife is good at it. She meets people and she asks them questions about themselves. She doesn't talk about herself, right? Me, if the refrigerator door opens, I start tap dancing because I from the light. And my favorite subject is me. No, I mean, no, I'm joking. But what happens is now I have a discipline. When I am meeting you, all right, I'm instantly going through my little top dog framework, ticking you off and saying, right, this is it. Such a you like the guys, is a big reader, etc. So I mean, and this is interesting because bookshelves it's a good question. Should you write a book? Right? I mean, now I mean, when people say, right, I can say, look, I've written 3 books, right? The first one was this one, Enterprise and Venture Capital, right? This book made me about $5 million, right? Which is not a bad sum for a book to make. That's been reasonably successful. Why? Because what happened is it helped me raise 5 venture capital funds. Well, not actually raise 5, raise 3, the final 3, right? Because I was the guy who had written the book, right? And fund managers are two fellows. They're basically risk averse, which is the double checker in my system. Engineers, they love reading a lot. So when you can give them a presentation on your fund, which you give them a presentation, is you give the presentation, and then what we could do is say, by the way, here's a copy of my book. That explains our investment philosophy, how we analyze risk, and what we think on, and how we think basically what good businesses should have. We have a framework in there, etc. So that's effectively what we do. And we ended up raising, as I said, 3 venture capital funds, right? Venture capital funds, if you don't know, the fee is 2% a year for 10 years, right? Effectively, 20% of the money that you raise, you get as a management fee. So if you raise 150 million in funds, right? You get you get $30 million in fees over 10 years. Now, I don't know about you, but 30 million that's in fees, that's not unreasonable, right? That's sort of, it gives you a living, right? So, I mean, etc. Story behind this book is what happened was I had raised one of the first venture capital funds in Australia. It was called BT Innovation Limited. That was when I was at Bankers Trust. And I'd written some articles. I mean, I remember raising the money for it. I gave 40 presentations in 2 weeks. And people would say to me, what exactly? No one knew what venture capital was at the time. It was not a way, it was something to do with over in California. People didn't even know what Silicon Valley was. And they said, well, what exactly is venture capital? And I said, I'm like Socrates. I know nothing. Okay. However, what I did was the shares had an interesting structure. They were capital gains tax-free if you held them for 4 years. And what I said was, if we can maintain the asset value of the fund, which of course we'll do, effectively, at the end of 4 years, when you sell your shares, you'll get the same price you paid for them. That is effectively a 28% post-tax return. 28% return over 4 years isn't bad. The story has 2 lovely stories about it, but I'll just tell you one. To get the book published, what happened was they contacted the person. I'd written a couple of articles, and I was on the board of JASA, the Securities Institute, was a magazine. And they asked the editor to write, Ellen Unwin, she'd written various books for them, to write a book on venture capital. And she very kindly said, not me. There's actually this young guy called Chris Golis that works at Banker Trust. He's written a couple of interesting articles on venture capital. You should try him. Look, John Ironmonger was his name. He's unfortunately now died of cancer. He's a great guy. And he said, Chris, you should interview, go see Chris. So I get this phone call, a total expectedness. There's John Ironmonger here. Chris, I'd like to take you to lunch. And I said, sure. He said, I know a little Italian bistro that I love going to in North Sydney. What day are you free? And I said, well, start naming some dates. He said, you're free. And I said, yes, okay, I'll meet you there. So I go along to this bistro, and he walks. He's wearing a leather jacket, Armani shirt. He's got a cravat on. Okay, he has the beard. He talks to the he's not using eye talks. He talks to the maitre d'. He points over to my table. He comes across. He's softly spoken, right, and he stutters a bit. And I go, Jesus Christ! I have an artist here, right? And artists basically are highly individualistic, right? They're basically highly introverted, but it's what you expect to be in a publisher because they do a lot of reading, right? And he went, and so I'm using all the artist tricks. I'm talking, not avoiding eye contact, which you do with artists, speaking slowly, clearly, not too fast. And suddenly he says, passes across the wine list and says, choose a wine. And I look at the wine list and I go, look, there's only one wine worth drinking on this list. And I chose a $400 red. And this is 1988, baby. This is when that's probably worth $800 now.
Oh, no.
And he looked at it and he looked at it and he said, is that the wine you want? I said, the restaurant drink it. I said, I'll tell you what, don't worry about that. I got out my American Express card and said, put the wine on my card. You just buy the lunch. There's a long pause. He finally says, put away your card. The publisher always buys the first lunch. New authors, right? So what happens is we have the lunch. And I always say to people, is he going to write? Is he going to publish the book? Do you think he's going to publish the book?
Mm.
Is he going to go back to his boss, give him an $800 expense claim and say, we're not doing the book?
We're not doing the book.
No. Okay. Anyway, the book got written. It was fantastic. I mean, it did 5 editions. I don't know if you know it. Books like this. I mean, first of all, they only accept 1 of 100 authors, right? That's the simple reality. Okay. And for editions, it's like, 1 in 100 basically goes to a second edition. Of them, 1 in 100 goes to a second edition, third edition, 1 in 100 goes to 4. This book went through 5 editions. 5 editions.
Wow.
And effectively, it made my name in the industry. Now, whether we do it now, I don't know. People try to write books, but that's how that book got published, right? And it's because I was able to analyze the guy and it come across as a sensitive, caring individual, right? Someone absolutely fit in, and they were very happy, and because effectively, I made it for. The book was not just for venture capitalists, for entrepreneurs. I said, look, there's only 20 venture capitalists. There's probably 10 venture capitalists in Australia at the moment. That's not very sales, but there's lots of people who want to be successful entrepreneurs. This book will tell them how it's done, right? What's how the game is played, right? And I must have had a dozen people ring me up and say the book's made me a couple of $1 million. Thanks very much, at least, right? That's basically what's happening.
Congratulations! Yeah, I mean,
no. I mean, I'm happier that it allowed me to raise venture capital funds, and I could raise. I got the, as I own half the equity in the management company. I had 2 partners each. They each own 25%. Basically, let's just say a certain part of the fees came in the right direction towards me. Right.
Now, Christopher, thank you so much for that. And what you just did there, I mean, on a personal note, I'm also in the process of writing a book. So you've just really solidified the fact that putting a book out there would actually help you.
Well, it has to be. I got a lesson for you there. I was saying, listen, just running a book and putting it on the internet, I mean, was a chance. The big thing is you need to get an independent publisher to do it, right? That's what I call it. I got Allen Unwin, probably the best independent publisher in Australia, did the book, right? And what happens is Allen Unwin are like a test, right? Because they reject so many books, right? They're basically the guarantee of quality, right? Ditto, what happened for my second book, right? What happened then was they always ask you the first book. They said, have you got a second book? And I said, well, actually, I do. And I had this manuscript. And what happened was when I was leaving TNT to go to Bankers Trust, I decided I'd write the book about the selling system we developed, right? And I sent it off basically to various publishers and it got rejected, right? And when they came to me, I said, well, I've got this manuscript. Basically, it's called a book. I call it Psycho Selling, which was not a very good name. I'm the first to admit it, but that was the start for psychological selling. And they came back and said, it's not bad manuscript, but books on selling don't sell. And I was thinking, I got Tony Robbins, etc. I was going, this is bullshit. So I cold call a leading literary agent in Sydney, a woman called Jill Hickson, right? And I rang her up and said, I'd like to come and talk to you. I've just been published by Allen Unwin. I'm a new author, but I've got a second manuscript. I thought you might be able to help me. And she said, I don't do nonfiction. I said, well, maybe you'd like to look at this one as a change. Okay. Anyway, I'd like to meet you. So I go along and I give her my card. And of course, it's got the MA from Cambridge and the MBA from business school. And she immediately starts saying, you're at Bankers Trust. Do you know so-and-so? And I went, yes. And I suddenly went, Jesus Christ, I thought she'd be an artist like John Ironmonger. No, she stands between the authors and the publishers. She's an agent. She's a hustler, an absolutely middle hustler. And she's name dropping me. She's name dropping me. And what you got to do is, she said, do you know so-and-so? And I said, well, believe it or not, we were having lunch at Machiavelli 2 weeks ago. Absolute bullshit, right? I hardly knew the guy. And what about so-and-so? Oh, we were in an establishment having a drink a couple of nights ago, right? I mean, like, I'm on close friends with all these people. Anyway, I left the manuscript with her, rang her a couple of weeks later. We had a chance to do the manuscript. She said, we're doing the book.
Oh, wow.
I said, wait a minute, you doing nonfiction? She said, no. You described in there one character, and it was called basically something else, a hustler. She said, my husband has been in the newspaper, 300, 400 times, analyzed by basically reporters. You're the only person who's ever come close to analyzing my husband. That's why I'm doing the book.
Wow.
Right? Her husband was Neville Rand, the Premier of New South Wales. I'm talking about Jill Rand, right? I think that they're now separated. She was the best literary agent in Sydney. I mean, she was gold. If a publisher could get her your book. And basically, that's what happened. And that's how that book got published. Right?
Absolutely. Now, obviously, from that, emotional intelligence is often seen as a soft skill. And from what you're saying, it literally is the holy grail. Now, how can people start learning about this, or have you paved the way that people can?
Well, the big thing is there's two factors in emotional intelligence. This is where it goes here. First of all is knowing thyself, right? I mean, Goleman basically did the best model, right? Is understanding others and then relating to others, and then understanding yourself and learning what are your dominant goals and what are your less ones, and learning how to basically mirror the other person. To basically be the basic rule of emotion. There's several rules, but one rule is you have to know yourself. The famous Greek commandment. What are your emotional strengths and weaknesses? And if you go to my website, emotionalintelligencecourse.com, there's a simple quiz. Do it, and you'll basically, in fact, it takes 5 minutes to do. That'll give you a pretty good idea of your strengths and weaknesses. Or you can ask your partner when you, after how close they think I send you back a quick report saying this is it. The second thing is you got to learn the techniques of analyzing other people, because you can't walk in and meet someone and say, please do this 5-minute test first. I can do that to my coaching clients, but I can't do it to most people. And you got to have a system for analyzing people. And you've seen me talking about it, trying to work out what their dominant drives are. Once you know that, you can then start tailoring your conversation to them, right? And saying to them, so I could sort of, I'm acting over enthusiastic when I'm talking to you. And I'm telling you some stories of successes. You like winners. You're a politician. You got the blue top, right? You go out there. Okay, right, well, you like winners. And so do I, right? Particularly if they're entrepreneurs, right? So that's effectively the first thing. So that's the second part, is relating to them, right? How do you relate to people? So I'm giving you stories about wins, I mean, or losses that I won, like I told you, essentially. That's even better, right? But that's essential. But you've noticed I've been all the time. You can prove it. You can just check it out. And this book, for example, got picked up by McGraw-Hill, then took it over, and Kogan Page, who were at that time the leading booksellers. It also helped me create another business, because what happened was, when I ended up at TNB, as I said, Bankers Trust, I was then headhunted by a guy called Rennie Rivkin, which is another story in itself. He went down. So in between, basically, I was in a period when I just basically had no income. So I went to Chandler McCall and Kevin Chandler and said, Kevin, I've got an idea for a business. And I handed across this book. And he looked at it, and he realized that here was his intellectual property sitting in this book. Right? And he was just about to reach across and strangle me. And I said, Kevin, before you do that, he said, we should set up a business. You're sitting on a gold mine. You have one of the best techniques for you have the best technique for analyzing people in Australia, very quickly, very efficient, very practically, 7 items. I said, what we need to do is form a training company, and we'll market the things through distributors. We'll go to successful companies, etc. And I said, here's a business plan. And I gave him, just a guy, when you venture capture, you read a lot of business plan. Here's a 10-page document, basically setting how you set it up. We need basically $150,000 to execute it. I'll put in $10,000. You put in $140,000, and we split the equity 50-50. And they come back to me and say, we think 50-50 is a bit rich. How about 1/3, 2/3? You guys are so bloody tough. Yeah, but okay, it's a fair deal. I thought 1/3 of it for basically $10,000. I'm in on that. Right?
Yeah, but
so
you also had your IP in it, so doesn't that
his
come
IP? That's right. Well, we signed an agreement on that I could use it. Then I gave them $1 for being able to use their IP. You got to always give people consideration if you're signing a contract. So I gave them $1 for So anyway, what happens? We set the business. It was going quite well. It was, we picked up one of the best sales distributors in Australia and a very good guy in England who both of them were doing very well from it. But then St. George appeared, and this is for the third fund. First fund was BT Emission, third fund, and said, we want to basically set up a venture capital fund. The effective decision maker had read my book and was besotted with it. And effectively, we want you to tender for the management. And, and effectively, we won it. And it was a $20 million fund to get started. And I said to the guys, but one of the things I had to give is, there's two, well, first commitment was that venture capital would be I'd work on venture capital full time, right? And secondly, I'd commit for 10 years. This is called the key man clause in venture capital. You have to basically work at it for 10 years. This is because the success has come early in venture capital, funny enough, and there's a lot of crap you have to, when you're getting rid of companies at the end, there's a lot of crap you have to get out of. And a lot of times it means putting the company into administration, but that's just basically the way of the world, right? And that's what happens. So that's effective. So I said to guys, I can't continue doing this. I did very much the right thing. I sold back my shares at cost, right? I could have argued with them, done that. After that, I walked on water. Even more so when they came to me and said, there's this company called ResMed. I didn't have a fund then. He said, what do you think of ResMed? I said, ResMed has probably one of the best entrepreneurs in Australia working for it, Peter Farrell. If you can get in there, make an investment into ResMed, you grab it. I wish I had a fund. I'd do it right now with my eyes closed. They put in $3 million, walked away with $100 million 3 years later.
Wow.
They were never complaining.
I can imagine.
Right.
Now, what would be the best way that people can maybe get to learn, some of the courses that you've got?
Okay.
I know you have mentioned it.
The two ways, the courses, it's $25 and $5 of your time to do the first one. That's the introduction. Then there's one on salespeople, one being a manager. The other way is, and this is getting back to it, is this book. This is my third book. And this one, it was published by Wilkinson Publishing. And, and they did it. The book is, to me, extremely high quality. I want CEOs to read it. I wrote it for my elder daughter, right? When she was managing a team at Scandi of 8 people, and she got headhunted by Perpetual. And she was managing 30 people before she was 30. And she said, Dad, you've read all the books on management. What book should I read? And I said that the secret to management is understanding people. And the book you should read is, okay, I tell you what, Louisa, I'm retiring out of venture capital because basically I'm 65. They won't believe I'm going to be around when I'm 75, and neither did I. I said, I'll write you a book, but in the meantime, read Stephen Covey's The 7 Habits of Highly Successful People. Again, the magic number 7, right? So this book has 3 sections in it. First section explains the system. Second, how you apply it as a manager. And then the third one is basically a tribute to Charles Handy. He organized what was the best course I've ever done. And it's at the M.E.D.I.A program, besides being my tutor. And one of Charles's great lines was, companies come and go, but the great plays last forever. And what we would do is each week is read one of the great plays, all right, and then discuss them in an hour. We had a colleague of Charles that's running it. He was a very good Socratic debater, and we are. So, the first play we read was Antigone. Have you heard of Antigone? Antigone, written by Sophocles. Cut out yesterday this article for the Australian, right? It's Henry Ergas, one of their most literate writers, comparing Donald Trump to King Creon, who was the king in basically Antigone. It's basically a discussion of Antigone. It's one of the key plays, if anyone wants to understand the Western world, needs to read, right? But we read Julius Caesar, Hamlet, King Lear, all the great plays, and this one contains those, plus Death of a Salesman, right? It's basically a tribute to Charles Handy. What I do is I analyze the characters in the plays according to how the profiling systems I've got, right? So, for example, Claudius is the king and the king in Hamlet, who's murdered Hamlet's father. He was the brother of the king, murdered him, and basically the play's about basically what Hamlet should do. Hamlet is an artist double checker. He can't make up his mind. He's very, very imaginative, very creative, but he can't work out whether he should kill the king or not, right? I mean, this is the great sort of play. So he's a great procrastinator, right? So you analyze the play, and I analyze the play according to the characters, right? So you can just read the book. Now, I'm happy if you want to box them and give them to people, or I'm happy. I just want, if people want to write to me and say, I just want to get the postage. They're going to have the book for free. I just want to get my books from the seller out into the marketplace for people to use them. I mean, I know everyone uses this Kindle, and you can download the stuff. I've sent the book into more readable form on a Kindle, and that's the three elements of this book, right? But I put each of the plays up as well. Call it the emotional intelligence of Antigone and emotional intelligence, etc. But I analyze them because to me, emotional intelligence is actually working out the key core temperament components. If you can do that of a person, you're on the way. It's so much easier if you've got a system to go tick, 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 bang. Once you learn it, takes 5 minutes to learn, and then you can deal with it, right? And you make decisions on people. You say, right, what do I want for we're just in the process of choosing a real estate agent for selling this house.
Right.
Right. Who do you want to sell? What are the ideal characteristics? And you think about it. Well, I want the guy who's the sharpest tool in the shed. I want the guy who's going to, approach it, as a very successful track record in selling houses in Boston, right? And basically is sharp, right? To get the idea, and he's going to come up with a way, and doesn't, anyway. We've got one. I mean, I was 50-50 on him before, but when I put him through the gamut, I'd written out some questions. This guy answered them perfectly, right? And I went, okay, this guy is good. He is the sharpest tool in the shed. We're going with him. My wife wanted to go with him, and she normally dislikes those people. She was completely saying no, because she's much more sensitive than me. Okay, and she likes people who are nice, etc. And she's much more sort of, but she was right for this guy, and I was saying, I'm a bit worried. It was screw us, blah blah blah. And I thought, no. What's we do? Anyway, I've told him he's got the mandate, so I just said, look, we're free. Drop the agreement. He asked me to do one or two things. I've done them, so we're on the way. But I'm just trying to give you the flavor, right? I mean, it's how you do it. But he had this key component which I wanted in there, which is a bit of the hustler. Right, to be honest, that's what I wanted to do. And they are, because basically he summed it up brilliantly. He said real estate agents do not sell properties; they negotiate. And hustlers are the great negotiators, right? And sometimes you have to use them, right? And we're very fortunate at the moment. We've got, a great hustler politician in the world right now, Donald Trump. He's fantastic, basically, right? He's a paranoid psychopath, right? But he is a realist, right? That's the great thing. And everyone's talking about, for example, oh, it's terrible what he's doing to Ukraine. He has a big problem. America is basically going broke, right? I mean, they're over their maximum in terms of debt. Their debt is higher than their GNP. It's sitting at about 110. It's forecasted that basically within 5 years you get to 120. That's when the alarm bells start really ringing in the bond companies.
Well,
And you know,
and it's a collapse, yeah.
And they've spent $350 billion. I mean, 350 billion they've estimated. And the people want Americans. The Americans is a democracy, and the people in America want out of Ukraine, right? They're saying it's a European war. We're out of it. We've done our bit. We put in far more money than anyone else, and we're much more worried about China. And at the moment, we're not rich enough to fight a war on two fronts, and they're not. Right? Trust me, that's my analysis at the moment. They're not.
Absolutely.
All right, and it's very unfortunate what's going on, but you know, and I'll finish up with just to sort of make this point, just to show you. Right, Churchill, who you would know, basically British leader during World War II, they and France went to war in 1939 over Poland. Remember, they started World War II over Poland, right? At the end of World War II, they had a conference in Yalta. Churchill, Roosevelt, Stalin. Okay, Roosevelt, if you see the pictures of him, he's on death's door. He dies 4 weeks later, right? He just said, okay, Stalin said, I'm taking over Eastern Europe. And part of Eastern Europe was Poland. And that's the reality. And Roosevelt said to Churchill, that's it. And Churchill basically said, these are the cards that are dealt to me. All right? And we could not believe, there's the irony. He started World War II over Poland. And what does he end up doing? He ends up giving Poland to the Russians, and they have a terrible time for the next 50 years. That's the irony, right? That's the reality. But Churchill said, those are the cards I was dealt, right? And that's Zelensky's in the same position. Now, what are the cards you have? And Trump was using those words to him. You haven't got the cards, right? He's saying, you haven't been dealt with the cards now, right? And he's desperately trying to basically end the war. So he doesn't have to he can start rearming the U.S. and basically knock out one of their drains in their budget, right? That's what I think he's doing, right? Absolutely. Because he's a realist.
Absolutely. Well, now, Chris, you were absolutely right. I mean, you got it all figured out. I've got notes, and I feel like I'm an emotional intelligence expert right now, just from listening to you and all the things that you're talking about. And you know, I mean, for those that have ears would have heard all of those things, but there's so many things that you've brought in this particular episode, which I think people will go and, you know, figure out themselves, especially, you know, about the number 7 and also the most important business, you know, knowledge that you imparted with us, which is basically be good with one-to-one meetings. And all of that stems from, like you said, self-awareness, having an understanding of, you know, certain intricacies and systems that will make you a likable character and things of that nature. But there's one question that I haven't heard you answer. You've talked about where you've been. You've talked about what you have done. What's next, Chris? What sort of legacy do you hope to leave in the field of emotional intelligence?
Oh, well, I mean, I've actually done it by doing the courses and the books. Okay, frankly, where I am at the moment, I mean, to be honest with you, I'm 80, right? I'm actually, I just wrote, I enjoy writing. I just wrote a blog on old age and wisdom, right? And it's a good question. You know, what do you do? And frankly, there was a guy called John Stuart Mill. I don't know if he was the leading English philosopher during the 19th century. And he was trained by his father he was going to be the person who was going to solve the world's problems. He was learning Greek and Latin when he was 2 and 3, right? And suddenly, John Stuart Mill had this insight when he was about 20. Suppose all the world's problems have been solved, right? What do I do then, right? And he had a mental breakdown at the age of 20. And what happened was he ended up saying, he started reading poetry, particularly Wordsworth. Well, I thought, at the moment, what am I trying to do? I'm trying to find the book you should read when you get to 80 and you're at old age. At the moment, I play golf twice a week. I played bridge twice a week. I call it the Eisenhower retirement, because that's what Eisenhower did. When he retired, they gave him the Republicans built him a house at the Masters. He was a terrible golfer like me, but also he was a great bridge player because he was very, very intelligent. My dad had a lot of respect for him. He served under Eisenhower, right? Okay. And what happened was that, so I'm at that position, and I just said, what I'm going to do is I'm writing blogs now just about the things I enjoy writing about, right? So one of them was basically one was Shakespeare on Power, right? Because I belong to the Bill Shakespeare Company here as a member. I go along to the play. In fact, we're going to see I'm going to see Henry V tomorrow night. I'll say Tuesday night. Yeah, tomorrow night. But they had a panel, and it was a shambles, right? And I got to reading, and there's a very good book on Shakespeare on Power, written by the leading humanities professor. At least that should have been somewhere discussed. And he analyzes tyrants, right? This guy, he's a Harvard professor of humanities, which would be the leading humanities professor in America. And he talks about tyrants, people who want basically to get power so they can increase their wealth, whereas the good people basically want to do it because they can improve themselves. You get some of the kick perks, obviously, but I mean they don't want to be polished. And we've had some very good prime ministers in this country. I think Hawke was a great prime minister. I think Howard was a great prime minister. Okay, we've also had some terrible ones, right? And I won't basically go into detail, but most people know who they are. I mean, and we have some tragedy. And the tragedy of Abbott, for example, who was well-meaning, right, and a very motivated, but his hustler, his shrewdness was low, right? And he thought if he was generous, and he was very generous to Turnbull, stabbed him in the back. And it's out of Julius Caesar, right, basically there. And then you have Julia Gillard and Kevin Rudd, who each stabbed each other in the back. I mean, it's fascinating stuff, right? Okay. And you see it. And if you understand the model that I've got, okay, the psychopaths are an important part of it, right? That's the great thing. And most people who learn about it are trying to climb the corporate ladder. Learning who is a corporate psychopath in your organization and who is a corporate bully is probably the most valuable information you can have, because you're going to know how to handle them. Okay. Psychopaths need a lot of flattery, right? And again, bullies like people have backbone. You got to stand up to them.
Absolutely. Now, Chris, I can't thank you enough for sharing your incredible journey with us today. I mean, your life story and your experience have so much of value that it only takes one, person to actually sit back and then really want to, absorb all of it in. But what I'm really excited about is, what you have done, which is basically you've lived that whole life throughout your days in venture capital and things of that nature. And you've learned all there is to learn about, that particular side of things. And now you're sending the elevator down so that you can help others be, do, and have a happier existence, especially when they have an understanding of emotional intelligence. And I can't wait to see what people are going to do with all this information and how they're going to be utilizing the resources that you have given us on EmotionalIntelligenceCourse.com, and also those that want to connect with you on LinkedIn. So thank you so much, Chris.
Great to talk to you. Okay, thanks very much for having me on your program. It was very good.
Absolutely. Anyway, and for those that are watching, thank you so much. And I want you to thank Chris in your own way by visiting EmotionalIntelligenceCourse.com or connecting with him on LinkedIn. And obviously, if this resonated with you, I want you to also consider sharing this with somebody who might benefit from understanding the power of emotional intelligence. There's quite a lot that was discussed in this call today, and also just an understanding of the self and also understanding the person that you are going to be communicating with. And as Chris has said, one of the biggest things about business is being very, very good at one-to-one meetings. And he has just so showcased that to us, in the time that we've spent together. So don't forget to subscribe to the Online Prosperity Show for more inspiring conversations like this. And in fact, join us next as we're going to be exploring ideas that can lead you to a happier existence. Until then, keep thriving and embrace the journey. Bye for now.
Cheers. Bye bye.